Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again with me, Amrita Tripathi. This week, I'm very excited to bring you a conversation with Dr. Stanly Johny. He's the author of Original Sin, among other books that we're going to discuss, as well as being the international affairs editor at The Hindu. Thank you so much for joining us for this chat. It's a super busy time, I think, especially for your field of specialization. A lot is going on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Amrita.
So, I'm going to start by just placing in context and hopefully show this tweet of yours where you're signing books in Doha, where you were during the recent launch of missiles, by Iran on US bases in Qatar, and just say, as a very basic question, and I'm no longer a journalist, so I can ask stupid questions. What is actually going on on the world stage right now? It just looks like every region is doing worse than the rest. And I know you spent a lot of time putting this in context. Right now, where we stand, and it's the 27th of June, just so this will be in context, you were there during this time of obviously very heightened stress, very heightened volatility and conflict. Can you share a little bit about that perspective, and we'll dive straight in?
Yeah, I was there for some book discussions, but then, of course, on Monday night, Saturday, I had a sense that the US attack was happening. I talked to a source in Tehran, and then because on June 13th, I think the Iranians were basically caught by surprise. They didn't expect the Israeli attack was happening because the US talks were still on. And on June 15th, the Iranians were ready to meet Steve Witkoff and his team. And then the Israelis carried out the attack. And I think my assumption was that the Israeli attack was not going, in a sense. Yes, the Israelis were able to inflict enormous damage on the Iranians, but if they expected the Iranian regime would basically lose its coherence and collapse, that was not happening. And the Iranians were retaliating. And then it was evident that the American involvement was needed. And President Trump came and said that he will take a decision in 2 weeks. But this time, the Iranians know that this was some kind of a deception tactic. So on Friday evening, I was talking to someone in Tehran, and then they said that the Iranians expect the attack is coming tonight, and the attack actually happened that night. So yeah, that morning I was actually sleeping, and then even my wife was texting me. The US is carrying out an attack, and what are you doing? You just wake up. And I woke up and I saw a tweet, bro, wake up. Someone was tweeting, asking me to wake up and analyze what is happening in the region. And then, so the US carried out this attack. B-2 bombers bombed Fordo, because Fordo, if you look at, see, Iran has three major nuclear facilities, Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. Israel had attacked both Isfahan and Natanz. But even Natanz, which is largely an overground facility, they have an underground uranium haul as well. The IAEA assessment was that the overground facility was completely destroyed, but they could independently assess whether the underground facility was destroyed. But Fordo is a heavily fortified nuclear facility. Which means the Iranians were, when they started building Fordo, they knew that this attack would happen. It would come at some point of time. So the main purpose of Fordo was to withstand any kind of attack. So this was built deep underground. So the Israelis knew that they couldn't destroy it alone. So they wanted the B-2 bombers. The B-2 bombers will come and drop bunker buster bombs, and the bunker buster bombs can actually go several meters deep underground and then cause an explosion, destroying the facility. And the US apparently dropped 6 bunker buster bombs. So the American involvement was needed. So the United States did that. So I think what my understanding was that after the US involvement, the Israelis had sounded out that they were willing to wrap up the war. And then they mediated through the Qataris. The Qatari prime minister talked to the Iranians. And the Iranians said that they will also stop firing the rockets if the Israelis stop bombing. But now that the Americans were involved, the Iranians said that they will do that only after hitting an American base. I think, you can call it
Yeah.
choreographed, because they had given fair warning to the Americans. And that's how this attack took place on Monday evening.
And presumably, if they hadn't given fair warning, it would have been a much deteriorated situation. I do want to ask you, and I'm going to again show one of your tweets, because in the middle of all of this, again, very serious, very volatile, very depressing news globally. I also noticed that on social media, everyone has become a foreign policy expert, right? As in
Yeah,
everyone has an
yeah.
opinion or a take. You have this really long but very, very interesting tweet with perspective, which you on the Israel-Iran 12-day war and what's been playing out. And you end with thank you for your attention to this matter. And I just want to start laughing and be like, it's really great. You can keep your sense of humor. Also, as you said, people are tagging you and saying, bro, wake up.
Yes,
We need your
yes,
perspective.
yes, yes.
But on a more serious note, you've been traveling in this region, and I haven't. I read the Mullahs and the Comrades, another very highly recommended book. ISIS Caliphate is on my list, and I'm still reading Original Sin. You have obviously been working on this region for. Can you give us a little bit of the context in terms of your travels to the region, multiple reporting trips? How hard was it to have relationships across the board? Was it helpful in this case that you are Indian? We've had a very long and balanced history, which I'm going to come to. I mean, I think our relationship is also obviously it has to be nuanced. It's under a lot of stress with all different players in this space. But take us through your background, what's led to you to write these books, and of course the reporting itself.
I think it helps me being an Indian to travel to different capitals of the region. For example, in 2022, late 2022, I was in Israel. Early 2023, I was in Tehran. So, I mean, I think it may not be possible to travel freely in both capitals if you are a Western journalist, because the Iranians will have their own suspicion. Or if you are an Arab journalist, the Israelis will have their own suspicion. So being an Indian, I think that is helpful. I also faced, I faced difficult experiences because I had written about it. One experience I had at a checkpoint in Israel back in 2018 because I was coming back from Ramallah, the Palestinian territory in the West Bank, and then I was stopped, and then I was literally harassed by Israeli security agents because I was because I was coming from West Bank. So I had those experiences, but generally, I was actually welcome when I travel with an assignment to both regions. So sometimes the Israelis may not be happy with what you are writing. Sometimes the Iranians may not be happy because you could see that Israeli ambassador responded to one of my tweets saying that I got completely mistaken. I take his disagreements seriously. I mean, of course, he has his own points, but he also agrees with me in a sense. He says that Israel prefers a bloody nose. My argument was that the Iranians gave Israel a bloody nose. So basically, he agrees with me, but he disagrees with a larger point. The Iranians sometimes tell me that when I wrote about three end games, the three options before Benjamin Netanyahu, the Iranians told me that you were wrong. Iran is prepared to fight a long war, even with American involvement. So, I mean, they have their own opinions, but generally it's not hostile. I think because India has excellent relationship with Israel, Israel is a very important defense partner, and we have technological and intelligence cooperation with Israel. Iran is a traditional partner for India because we have a long civilizational relationship with India. Energy relationship was vibrant until recently, but India has invested in Chabahar. India sees Iran as a gateway to Central Asia, etc., etc. So I think that was actually helpful. The point is that, but sometimes what I see that Indian journalists are becoming very, very, let's say, parochial. They are driven by ideology. I mean, sometimes you are a fan of a certain country, government, and then you disregard, overlook facts. So I think that is something that you have to be careful when you report. You keep your ideological or, your religious calculations apart, and then you look at the region. This is a very interesting region, West Asia. This is the cradle of civilizations. This is a region that has always seen interventions from the great power, right? Whether it is Great Britain before the Second World War, the United States ever since the end of the Second World War, and the conflicts in the region. You have Israel, you have the Arab world, you have Iran. You have three pillars in the region. And then basically now what you are witnessing is that Israel is a very powerful country from a military point of view, and backed and protected by the United States, the world's most powerful country. That actually tilts the balance of power in the region. And the Arab countries more or less toe the line because they all are American allies. But Iran is the only counterweight to this. So Iran is trying to assert itself as a counterbalance to Israel's unipolar hegemony in the region. And Arab countries do not want to get entangled in this conflict, but they are trying to sit out. So, I mean, a lot is happening in the region. And the United States, you asked in the beginning that why there are so many conflicts happening. That's true. That's also because the United States is basically receding from its unipolar moment. It's no longer, it is a great power. It's the most powerful country in the world, but it's no longer the kind of power it used to be in 1991. You see, even in 2003, even in 2011, the United States went for a prolonged war in West Asia. But in 2025, the United States opted to carry out a single bombing and back off
Yeah.
because the United States doesn't want to get involved in another prolonged war in West Asia, in the region. So the character of the US great power status is changing, and you have other powers like in Europe, Russia is trying to violently overthrow the existing power equations through its war in Ukraine. China is a big major power, emerging power. The Iranians are trying to remain as a counterbalance to Israel. So a lot of things are happening in the region. So
Yeah.
that's why, yeah, yeah.
That's the so. Would you agree? So I was listening. I think Christiane Amanpour recently on one. I think it was her podcast, which she also has now. I highly
Yeah.
recommend. It's quite interesting. Clearly, you need your own podcast, Stanley. I think that's what's going to be the next call to action. But she was saying somewhere that right now there is no world order. I mean, people have been talking about a new world order. I think she was kind of articulating it feels like there's no world order. Is that a position you agree with? Do you think we're in that state of flux between world orders, or do you think this is essentially, like you're saying, different players flexing and trying to ensure? And where does India play a role in all of this? Because that balancing act is getting trickier and trickier.
So my argument is it's a theoretical position. There has never been a world order. So the world order is essentially anarchic because countries always try to maximize their power. But what happened during the Cold War, there was some kind of a balance between two great powers. And after the Soviet Union disintegrated, the United States became the sole superpower. So there was some kind of a hierarchy after during the unipolar moment of the United States. And that moment has passed. And because that moment has passed, what you have now is utter chaos. It is a global disorder, basically. And in this global disorder, you have, fundamentally you have three flashpoints. One is, of course, the NATO Russia flashpoint, where the war is still going on. The other is West Asia or the Middle East, where the main antagonists are Israel and Iran. And we just witnessed a short 12-day war between these two. And the third flashpoint is China Taiwan, which is heating up. I mean, I don't know when it is going to lead into an explosion, but it is heating up. So essentially, what we have now is that, the fundamental character of the international system is that there is no proper order. But at least you had a de facto hierarchy with the United States being the world Superman. And the United States is no longer that superpolis. So, which means smaller powers are trying to reassert themselves, great powers are trying to reassert themselves. That is deepening the anarchy in the international system, as a result of which we are witnessing the conflicts now.
Interesting. India, Pakistan, of course, still also fresh in our memory as a
Yeah,
a constant flashpoint, I feel.
yeah.
Can I ask you, when you talk about the relationships that India has, traditionally with Iran, even more recently, more recent relationship with Israel, of course, when it comes to defense and tech, Palestine, that is something that you hear when you travel also, and I'm sure that this comes up with you. Palestinians, especially immigrants in other countries, will say that they felt let down by India because the position has been pretty calibrated for a long time. But all of a sudden, India's sort of sitting out votes in the UN, refusing to call this a genocide, etc., etc. What is some of what you're hearing there? And again, keeping our own, I suppose, ideologies and feelings aside, what do you think India's challenge is in this situation, where ideally, you wouldn't want this kind of war to continue?
So, what India has tried to do with regard to Palestine is that without dropping its historical position in favor of the creation of a Palestinian state, India is basically trying to balance between Israel and its this historical position. Because you look at the UN General Assembly resolutions, India abstained from three votes, but India voted in favor of many more. So India actually condemned the war. India actually condemned Israeli settlements in the West Bank. India repeatedly condemned Israeli settlements in the West Bank. India had called for a ceasefire, supported the call for a ceasefire in the past. I think India abstained from the latest vote. I guess that is the Operation Sindoor effect, because during Operation Sindoor, the Indians believed that the Israelis came forward and supported India. So when a vote came up in the UN General Assembly, India abstained. And India did the same thing with the SCO statement. When the SCO passed a resolution condemning Israel, India did not basically support the SCO statement because primarily because India believes that India would not condemn Israel for its attack on Iran, but at the same time India called for de-escalation. So this is some kind of a balancing, but at the same time it is tilted towards Israel. I mean, it is very, very evident. So, With regard to Palestine, I understand the position India had taken because at the UN, India supports Palestine. I mean, at least two-state solution. When you support two-state solution, what you are actually doing is that you are calling for the establishment of a Palestinian state because Israeli state is already there. And if you want a two-state solution, you need to oppose the illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank because as long as the Israelis settle in the West Bank, you are not going to get a Palestinian state. So you can see a continuity in India's position. I think when it comes to Israel's attack on Iran, if you ask for my opinion, I would say that India could have taken a much more emphatic position. Okay, I mean, if India doesn't want to condemn a country, I understand that India didn't condemn Russia either, but India upheld its position that even with regard to Russia-Ukraine war, that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. I think India should have said the same thing about Iran because Israel launched the war against Iran. And it is definitely not in India's interest destabilized, chaotic Iran in its continental neighborhood. And India, as I pointed out earlier, had invested millions of dollars in Chabahar. And not just Chabahar, Iran could be a very important, a vital link in India's north-south transport corridor, which would connect India's coast through Iran and Azerbaijan to Russia and Northern Europe. So Iran plays a very important role in India's geopolitical dynamics, right? And if that country's sovereignty is violated, even if India did not want to condemn Israel, I understand that India is historically reluctant to condemn countries that have friendly ties with India, but India should have basically called for upholding sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran. But I think my understanding is that initially India was a bit reluctant, but once the Pakistan angle settled in, when Asim Munir met Donald Trump, and when the United States immediately after joined the war, you can see the tone changing in New Delhi. The Prime Minister expressed his deep anguish, his deep worries over the conflict, and he asked for immediate de escalation and a diplomatic solution. So, this position I think India could have taken from the very beginning. But I think the general understanding in India is this. There are strategic analysts who argue that a nuclear Iran is not in India's interest. I get the point. I mean, in India's continental neighborhood, India might not like to have another one more nuclear power that could alter the balance of power. But at the same time, Israel coming and bombing Iran, destabilizing Iran, the United States coming and bombing Iran is certainly not in India's interest.
Yeah.
Imagine if the war spills over into the Gulf.
Yeah.
You know, 9 million Indians are living there. And
Yeah.
India is a country that is importing oil to meet 89% of our energy requirement. These are beyond your, whatever, even if you have ideological affinities, your interests, these are
Yeah,
huge,
it's
heavy interests are at
yeah.
stake. So you should take a position that is in line with your interests, that a war aimed at destabilization of Iran is definitely not in your interest.
That's interesting. And so, right now, is it more like a wait and watch to see what happens next? I mean, when we're talking about the sort of state of anarchy that you were describing earlier, do you think that's the only thing that governments who are not directly involved are doing? It's essentially wait and watch?
Yeah, I think there could be more conflicts. Generally, if you look at the international system, I don't see any checks and balances that would stop aggressive powers or even reluctant powers that are intended to use violence. So those checks and balances are not there. So if you look at the larger international system, I think there could be more violence. With regard to Israel and Iran, I don't expect this to lead to a flare up in the immediate future. Why? Because Israel, before the war, Israel sensed a great opportunity to meet its objectives through a military intervention in Iran. And Israelis have claimed victory. Netanyahu claimed it's a historic victory, etc., etc. But I doubt whether Israel actually met its objectives because Israel alone could not destroy the nuclear facilities. Even with the help of the United States, the American intelligence community assesses that the nuclear program has been set back by a few months. They haven't been destroyed. And
Yeah.
even if the nuclear facilities were destroyed, including Fordo, there are reports that Iran had basically moved out the enriched uranium out of the nuclear facilities. Iran is a huge country. It is
Mm.
some 70, 75 times bigger than that of Israel. So you never know, you don't know where the enriched uranium fuel is kept. And we are talking about a uranium fuel that is enriched up to 60% purity, right? And this once it's enriched to 60% purity, I was talking to our science editor the other day, you cannot downgrade it. you can downgrade it to a low enriched uranium level. So highly enriched uranium is a high enriched uranium. So the Iranians are keeping them. There is no
Yeah.
conclusion that the United States and Israel have destroyed it, right? So that
Yeah.
is one thing, which means your military intervention hasn't resolved the Iranian nuclear program. So how are you going to resolve this issue? Again, through diplomacy. Then why did you go and bomb Iran? And by bombing Iran, you basically made the Iranian government stronger. It is today stronger than what it was on June 12th, right? Netanyahu said that his military operation would lead to regime change.
Mm.
Donald Trump demanded unconditional surrender. And now Donald Trump is saying, God bless Iran. And the government in Iran is standing. So I think that opportunity with Israel had been preparing for this for years, but they failed to meet their objectives. So that means they might not go in again, not in the near future. So the Americans will push Iran to reach an agreement with them, a nuclear agreement. I don't know whether they might or they might not. But if you ask me, I think the incentive for Iran to make a bomb today is greater than it was on June 12th.
That's so interesting because you and other analysts are saying, if anything, it's actually made that support more entrenched. It
Yeah,
made them realize more than ever that they might need, even as a deterrent. I want to just ask you, so, from Original Sin, I'm just going to read a couple of lines and ask you what led to this book. And the timing, of course, could not have been more apt, I think, right? Because so you have written this after the October 7 attacks.
that's
It
right.
sort of ends with your saying that today's Israel, internally divided and externally isolated, sans the US support, wants to destroy Hamas, weaken Hezbollah, roll back Iran while continuing the occupation of the Palestinian territories. It is ready to continue to live by the sword, but that is also because it doesn't see any practical path towards peace. And you've also pointed out, maybe many of us have forgotten or not realized that Israel never has known peace as a country, right? I mean, the way
Yes,
it was. So
yes,
all of that stands true even now,
yeah,
several the following year.
yeah.
But B, I want to ask you a little bit about why did you want to write this book from this perspective that perhaps it's historic, it's contextual, it's political, and also I don't think we've seen that many points of view from, let's say, even a non-US or UK or
Yeah,
European
yeah, yeah,
lens. What
yeah.
led you to write this book or research it and write it?
So, the trigger was October 7 attack. So after October 7 attack, there were many, many debates. And one was basically that this war, Hamas started this war. This is Israel's dominant narrative, and Israel was only responding to this. Everybody was blaming Hamas. I have no love for Hamas, by the way. Everybody was blaming Hamas because Hamas. It is a brutal attack, October 7. I saw that. I have a full chapter about the October 7 attack. I went to Kibbutz Berry. I saw the devastation that Hamas attack had caused. Hundreds of people were killed. Many more, and dozens of people were abducted from Kibbutz Berry, which is right on the border. I went to the Nova Music Festival ground and saw again the devastation that the attack caused. It was a brutal attack. There is no question about it. But at the same time, the condition of people in Gaza and the West Bank, that was also brutal. This is, history didn't begin on October 7th. That is the whole point of this book. And because I haven't been to Gaza, I haven't got a chance to travel to Gaza, but I traveled in the West Bank a couple of times. I traveled across the West Bank from Ramallah to Abu Dis to Jenin to other parts of the region, other parts of West Bank. And even in 2015, when I first went to West Bank, what I witnessed in West Bank was beyond I can explain. It is horrible what the Palestinians endure in their day-to-day life. Israelis have a justification for everything they do, but if you are in one Palestinian town, if you want to go to another one, you will have to go through multiple Israeli checkpoints. There is no other way. So when October 7 happened, I thought I have to tell the story of both sides. One is the attack and what the Israelis suffered on October 7, and on the other is the injustice that has been, that the Palestinians have been suffering for decades. So I wanted to trace the roots of this conflict and basically tell the story of both sides. And as an Indian journalist who have traveled on both sides, basically, I was not only in Palestine, I was there in Palestine multiple times in Israel. I was in Tehran, I was in Jordan. So I've traveled in the region as part of my work. And also as a student of IR, I have been keenly following developments in West Asia. My PhD is on Israel. Professor Gulshan Detail, a great professor who taught me, who shaped my understanding about West Asia. She doesn't like Middle East. She always insists West Asia. So I'm liberal. I'm okay because people in the region call themselves Middle East now. So, but from India, if you look at the region, if you want to be geographically precise, it's West Asia. So I was lucky to get professors like that. So I've been following this from an academic point of view, and from a journalistic point of view, I have traveled in the region. So I thought we should bring out this book with a different perspective from the mainstream narrative you see in the Western press. So that was the objective of this book. And as the lines you read out, I wrote those lines in October 2024. Now we are on June 27th, 2025. The situation hasn't changed a bit. Israel still hasn't destroyed Hamas. 2 days ago, 7 Israeli soldiers were killed in a Hamas attack. Gaza is roughly a 324 square kilometer territory, and it's been sandwiched between the Mediterranean Sea and Israel. Gaza has been destroyed. I was told when I went to Israel after the attack, and I was told in April 2024 that northern Gaza had been completely destroyed, and the war still went on. You can imagine
This
the
is, sorry,
situation.
April 25, like this year you went?
2024.
24.
Yeah, a few months after October
I
7th.
see.
Even then, I was told that at least northern Gaza was completely destroyed. The war still went on, right? So Gaza is in ruins, and still Israel has not been able to defeat Hamas. It's an interesting question. It's a serious question which the Israelis should ask themselves. Why they haven't defeated Hamas? Why the war is still continuing? Why they face allegations of committing genocide? Why 60,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza? Why 2.3 million people were displaced in Gaza? Why there is a case at the International Court of Justice? Why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing allegations or an arrest warrant at the ICC for crimes against humanity and war crimes? I mean, these questions are not coming out of someone who hates Israel. That's not how it is. These questions are coming out, and these are genuine questions which the Israelis have to ask themselves. The way they conducted the war in Gaza, that has been a disastrous operation. There is no question about it.
I think what's so interesting is that we've come to this era where, unfortunately, when you ask questions, you're always painted as one way or the other. I mean, I keep seeing, like, for example, even Haaretz or journalists from Haaretz will be asking the same questions as you, or raising questions that anyone at this stage would be asking.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way social media is and it works is that you're just painted as, like you said, somebody will say you're pro Hamas when you're not pro Hamas. You're asking.
Yeah, I have been trolled left,
I'm
right,
sure.
and center. I learned to live with them now. I mean, I don't care.
I think I might get some of your trolls when I post this, so I'm going to be very careful with my settings. But I am interested to know, because obviously this is an area you care about deeply, you've studied deeply, you've traveled, in this entire region. Have there been any interesting responses that have stayed with you from people who read your book from the region, perhaps, or any of your books actually? Even the Mullahs and the Comrades, when it came out, was just really interesting. It was a different perspective again, right? Have there been any interesting responses that have stayed with you?
Yeah, I mean, about Afghanistan, yes, people have reached out to me. I had a couple of Afghan students in Chennai, for example. I mean, this is when the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was there. I teach at ACJ, so Asian College of Journalism. I take a course on IR. So young Afghan women who come to India to study, and then they read the book, and then they call me, and then they said, basically they were moved about what is written about their country, and I get the same response. So not all responses are positive, but I've got friends who come, friends from Israel. When they came to India, they call me, where will I get the book? And they got the book, they read the book, and then they gave critical feedback at the same time. They appreciated the tone and tenor of the book. um, you know so yes, I get very good feedback, both critical and constructive, and some praise you, some attack you, some give you constructive feedback. But yes, and the Palestinians also, mostly from the diplomatic circles, they reach out to me, and sometimes they want to meet us, talk to us about what's happening. So yes, I'm kind of constantly in touch with uh, people and the diplomats in the region.
And of course, your folks on Twitter were like, "Bro, wake up." Those are the other,
Yes,
the other.
yes.
I do want to ask you a couple more questions. So there's this interesting thing. I think it's on your LinkedIn where you said you're an editor who writes, a writer who teaches, and a teacher who speaks. So I do want to
Yes,
ask
yes.
you, what's also very heartening is that, even to hear that you have, like, there are readers, people who are very invested in the world we live in, will read long form. And of course, you're also the international affairs editor at the Hindu, which is really, that's the medium. When you're teaching young journalists nowadays, since you brought up ACJ and you are a teacher as well, what are some of the things that have come up that perhaps folks have to contend with now that were not the case when you were starting? And for example, when I started as a journalist, it was kind of a given that you would do fact checks, your opinion will not come in. It was not called misinfo, disinfo. It was have multiple sources, attribute, check your facts. And I think at that time people were not so quick to put you in a camp, and I feel like right now we're in a much more polarized, complicated perhaps era. Are there new challenges that you think journalism students come in with, and are they still as idealistic as ever?
I think everybody has an opinion. Sometimes it's not an informed opinion, but everybody has an opinion. Very, very strong opinion. So I tell them that wait, go slow. You have to read and try to understand what's happening instead of jumping into conclusions. This is something that I have noticed with all the batches, and this opinion. I mean, we should have an opinion, but we shouldn't live in silos. We should be open to other ideas. We should listen to people from across the aisle. So that doesn't happen. So that I think that is part of the rigorous journalism that you want to do. You need to basically read up a lot, understand a lot, talk to people from across the spectrum. So maybe I think that is something that they will learn once they start the job. I was also like that maybe when I was a student. But generally, what I have seen, I teach this course called Critical International Studies. So I teach young journalists at ACJ. I also teach graduates at SCRIA, which is International Studies. My course is International Studies, where it is more about political economy. Here, the focus is on geopolitics. But ACJ, what I can see is that the interest among these young students, they are keenly interested and invested in IR. I mean, when I was 2021, I didn't know much of the world map, you know. But they have a sense, they have a general sense about what's happening in the world, particularly about the main conflicts, about Russia, Ukraine, war, or the conflicts in West Asia. So there is, that deep interest. I think is it's very interesting. That is something which I appreciate. But I also generally I advise them to. I mean, some people have told me that no, I don't read Economist. It's a Western propaganda. No, it's not like that. No, I read. I'm a paid subscriber. I read Economist. I want to know what they are saying about India, Middle East, etc., etc. So I tell them, no, you have to read. That is very, very important. You have to read even the papers that you don't like. You have to follow even the journalists that you may not you disagree with. So I think that is something that we all have to pick up. But generally, I find it very. I mean, I have a lot of interactions with them. I try to discuss things. So I have. I mean, it's a very positive experience with young journalists.
That's great. I think you're giving me renewed hope in journalism, because mostly people are, quite not as bullish, I think, on
Yeah.
where journalism is. Just finally,
Maybe they get wasted once they start doing the job. They're still good
yes,
when they are students.
that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It takes a few years for that cynicism to
Yeah.
kick
Yeah.
in. But final question for the moment: is there anyone that you sort of look up to? Any mentors? Anyone you'd like to shout out, just in terms of gratitude, who's informed or shaped your worldview, your reporting, your career, actually?
Oh, there are a lot of people. I mean, generally my editors. I've been doing this job for quite some time, so I don't want to name anybody.
Yeah.
But from the academia, there are people. I've already told you about my professor who really helped me shape my understanding about the region. Because when I went to JNU, I mean, I had some sense about the world, but that's it. She basically taught me how to do research, rigorous research. So I'm always grateful to her. Professor Gulshan Titil, she retired. She lives in Delhi. And then I look up to, basically, I consider myself a realist. So I read a lot about realist theory. So realist theoreticians have also influenced me a great deal. Professor Stephen Walt, Professor John Mearsheimer. So I read their theoretical works. They help basically, theory is we can't predict the future. We don't have facts about future. We only have theories about future. We have facts about the present. We have facts about the past. To understand the future, I mean, we need a theoretical framework. That's my methodology towards international relations. So you need a map, you need history, you need a theory. So if you put these three together, you get a fair sense of what's happening in the world.
That makes it feel like all of us should just go out and put that
Yes,
into
yes.
perspective. Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
was really great to chat with you, get some of your insight, and we'll be following, of course, your columns and your Twitter and sharing some of these articles for folks to follow along. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you very much.